At 79 years old, I learned I had a son because my granddaughter wanted to know whether we were Scottish. That is the ridiculous part. Nobody was looking for a missing child. Nobody was investigating a family secret. There was no lawyer at the door, no mysterious envelope, no old photograph falling out of a book. There was a cardboard box on my kitchen table containing a plastic tube and instructions printed so small that I accused the company of discriminating against everyone old enough to afford the test. My granddaughter Ellie laughed. "Grandpa, you just spit in it." I understood that part. Then what is the problem? I object to being ordered around by saliva. Ellie was 24 and had inherited my late wife Helen's ability to ignore complaints she had correctly identified as entertainment. She had been building a family tree. Her mother's side was apparently well documented. Mine was a mess of repeated first names, vanished cousins, and elderly relatives who remembered dates according to whether something happened before or after somebody bought a Chevrolet. Ellie wanted the DNA results to fill in the gaps. So I took the test. 6 weeks later, at 7:14 on a Monday morning, my telephone started ringing. "Ellie." I answered. "If this is about Scotland, I don't care before breakfast." "Grandpa." Her voice stopped me. "What? Are you sitting down?" "No. Please sit down." I sat. "Did something happen to your mother?" "No." "Michael?" "No." "Then stop frightening me and tell me." Ellie took a breath. "Your DNA results came back." I gathered that. "You have a parent-child match." I did not understand the sentence. "I have 2 children." "I know." "Your mother and your uncle Michael." "I know, Grandpa." "Neither of them took this test." Silence. I leaned back in my chair. "Ellie." "The match says his name is Daniel Price." I waited. Nothing in the name meant anything. "How old?" 59. My coffee was still in my hand. I remember that because a few seconds later I noticed it spilling over my thumb. 59. My son Michael was 54. My daughter Susan was 52. Helen and I had been married 55 years before she died. The arithmetic took only seconds. Daniel would have been born 5 years before Michael. 3 years before I married Helen. I put down the coffee. "That is impossible." I thought it might be a mistake. It is. So I looked at the shared DNA. I don't know what that means. It means it isn't a distant cousin. It isn't somebody the system guessed wrong. "Grandpa, this man is either your son or your father." My father died in 1988. I know. She did not say the rest. She did not need to. I was 79 years old. Daniel Price was 59. And according to a plastic tube I had mocked 6 weeks earlier, somewhere in the world was a man old enough to have grandchildren of his own who shared half of his DNA with me. I asked Ellie. "Has he contacted you?" "No." "Has he seen the match?" "Probably." "Do not message him." "Grandpa." "Not yet." She went quiet. Then she said, "I already did." I closed my eyes. "Of course you did." I panicked. And apparently panic has Wi-Fi now. "Grandpa," he answered. My hand tightened around the edge of the table. "What did he say?" Ellie hesitated. Then she read it. I wondered if Thomas would ever take one of these tests. Tell him my mother's name was Ruth Ellison. There are names your mind forgets. And there are names it stores somewhere so deep that hearing them again does not feel like remembering. It feels like being struck. Ruth Ellison. I had not spoken that name in almost 60 years. I met Ruth the summer I was 19. She worked at a bakery near the railway station. I spent that summer working for my uncle's hardware business before leaving for a training program in another state. Ruth was funny. Fast. Always late. She hated coffee and drank it anyway because she said adulthood appeared to require unnecessary suffering. We were young. We cared for each other. Then summer ended. I left. She moved with her family not long after. We wrote a few times. Then the letters stopped. I assumed life had done what life does at 19. Moved both of us forward. 3 years later, I met Helen. Nothing about Ruth ever threatened what Helen and I built. Ruth belonged to a summer before my real adult life began. Or that was what I believed until a Monday morning 60 years later. Grandpa? Ellie's voice brought me back. I'm here. Do you know her? Yes. Another silence. Then my granddaughter asked the question I had already been asking myself. Did you know she had a baby? No. I had never been more certain of anything. By noon, I was less certain of almost everything else. Daniel sent me a message through the DNA website. It was short. Thomas, I am not asking you for anything. I have a family and a life. If you want to talk, I will. If you don't, I will respect that. Then one final sentence. I tried to contact you 12 years ago. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. 12 years earlier, Helen was alive. Healthy. We were living in the same house. We had been married 43 years. If a 50-year-old man had written to tell me he might be my son, I would remember it. I wrote back. How? Daniel replied 5 minutes later. I mailed a letter to your home. Did I answer? No. Then. Your wife did. I stood up from the table. I don't know why. There was nowhere I needed to go. Helen had been dead 5 years. And for the first time since losing her, I felt angry with her. Not annoyed. Not hurt by something she had once said. Angry. The woman I had slept beside for 55 years had apparently received a letter from a man claiming to be my son. And she had answered him without telling me. I typed. What did she say? Daniel did not answer immediately. Then. This is probably better over the phone. We spoke that afternoon. I called him. Not because I was ready. At 79, I had begun to distrust readiness. Most important things I had ever done occurred because waiting became more uncomfortable than moving. He answered after one ring. Hello? His voice meant nothing to me. That was strangely painful. Daniel? Yes. This is Thomas. A small pause. I know. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally I said. I don't know what I am supposed to call you. He laughed once. Daniel is generally safe. I laughed too. Not because the joke was particularly good. Because I needed evidence we were both ordinary men and not characters in somebody else's impossible story. I asked. Did your mother tell you about me? Eventually. When? When I was 31. Why so late? Daniel exhaled. She married when I was 2. The man who raised me was named Robert Price. He was my father in every way I understood the word. He died when I was 28. 3 years later, Mom told me he hadn't been my biological father. I looked at Helen's photograph on the shelf opposite me. Why did Ruth never tell me? I don't know the entire answer. Did you ask? For years. And? She said she tried. My stomach tightened. Explain. Daniel paused. She said she wrote to you after you left. I received letters. She said she wrote another one after she learned she was pregnant. I never received it. I believe you. I frowned. Why? Because I have what came back. That was the second moment that day when the world became slightly unfamiliar. What came back? My mother kept the envelope. There was a note inside with it. A note from whom? Daniel answered. Your mother. My mother, Margaret Rowan, had been dead 23 years. I had spent those years remembering her as stubborn, practical and almost aggressively loyal to her children. She was the kind of woman who kept every school photograph and threw away every instruction manual. She believed most emotional problems could be improved by soup. And according to a son I had discovered that morning, she had intercepted the most important letter anyone ever sent me. What did she write? Daniel said. I would rather show you. Why? Because you should see the handwriting. We arranged to meet on Wednesday. Daniel lived 2 hours away. 2 hours. For 12 years, the man who might be my son had lived closer to me than the lake where I took my grandchildren every summer. I had imagined him somewhere distant. Different life. Different world. He was 117 miles away. I did not sleep properly Monday night. Tuesday morning, my daughter Susan arrived without calling. She carried pastries. Susan brought food when she was worried. Helen had done the same thing. I was beginning to find family traits suspicious. Ellie told you. Susan put the bag on the counter. Yes. You could have called. I thought this was a conversation to have in person. I looked at her. Then something about Susan's face bothered me. Not surprise. Fear. She was worried about more than DNA. I asked. Did your mother ever mention Daniel Price? Susan's eyes moved toward the window. A tiny movement. Enough. I stopped breathing normally. Susan. She closed her eyes. Dad? How long? She sat down. Please let me explain. How long have you known I had another son? 10 years. I had been angry with Helen for less than 24 hours. Now my daughter had joined her. 10 years. Yes. Your mother died 5 years ago. I know. You have sat in this kitchen hundreds of times since then. I know. You watched me bury her. Yes. You helped me go through her clothes. Susan began crying. I know, Dad. And you never thought one of those afternoons might be a good time to mention I had a 59-year-old son? It was never that simple. Secrets always become complicated when the people keeping them explain them. Susan wiped her face. Mom got Daniel's letter 12 years ago. She opened my mail? It was addressed to both of you. That stopped me. Daniel had not written secretly to Helen. He had written to Thomas and Helen Rowan. Susan continued. Mom read it first because she got the mail. She panicked. She called me. Why you? Because you were with Uncle David. My younger brother David. 12 years earlier, David had suffered a stroke. He survived, but the following year was difficult. I drove him to therapy. Handled paperwork. Helped his wife. For months, every telephone call seemed to contain another problem. Susan said. Mom thought telling you then would break you. So she decided for me. She decided to wait. For what? For David to improve. He did. I know. So why did waiting become 12 years? Susan looked toward her hands. Because after 6 months it became harder. After a year, harder again. And every time Mom decided she was finally going to tell you, something happened. Michael lost his job. Ellie was born. David got sick again. Those are excuses. Yes. Her answer surprised me. Susan looked directly at me. They became excuses. At first Mom was protecting you. Then she was protecting herself from admitting she had hidden it. And me too. I sat opposite her. What did you know about Daniel? Mom contacted him. How? The number was in his letter. They spoke several times. Did you? Once. That hurt. My daughter had spoken to my son before I knew he existed. What did he want? Nothing. Everybody keeps saying that. Because it is true. He wanted to know whether you knew about him. Mom told him you didn't. He wanted to know what kind of man you were? I laughed bitterly. And your mother provided a review? Susan almost smiled. Several. Despite myself, I could imagine it. Helen never answered a simple question when 20 minutes of context were available. Did they meet? Susan stopped smiling. Yes. I got up from the table. Your mother met him. Once. Where? A cafe in Fairview? Were you there? I drove her. I stared out the window. 12 years earlier, Helen had told me she was spending the afternoon shopping with Susan. I did not remember the day. That was almost worse. A day meaningless enough for me to forget had been important enough for my wife and daughter to construct a lie around. What happened? Susan breathed out. They talked for almost 3 hours. About me? Mostly. Did Helen believe him? Yes. Before DNA? He had photographs of Ruth. Dates. Things Ruth had told him about you. And Mom said he looked like your father. That sentence stayed with me. My father, George Rowan, had been a quiet man. Broad shoulders. Heavy eyebrows. A habit of pulling one side of his mouth inward when thinking. He died before either of my children turned 20. Now somewhere 2 hours away was a 59-year-old man Helen had looked at and seen him. Why didn't she tell me after meeting him? Susan began crying again. She wanted to. That sentence is becoming meaningless. I know. She wiped her eyes. Daniel told her not to. I turned around. What? He could see how afraid she was. He told her he had waited 50 years. He could wait until she thought you were ready. And Mom let that become permission not to do it. The anger did not disappear. But it changed shape. Daniel had not demanded entry into my family. He had met my wife, seen her fear, and made himself easier to postpone. I wondered how often he had regretted being kind. Then Susan told me something worse. Dad, Mom tried again when she got sick. My chest tightened. What do you mean? The first time the doctors told her the cancer might not be curable. She told me she couldn't die with you not knowing. What stopped her? Susan did not answer. Then I understood. You. Susan broke. She covered her face. I asked her to wait. Why? Because you were already terrified. Because you were pretending you weren't. Because every appointment was bad news and Michael was falling apart and Ellie was away at university, and I thought if Mom told you there was another son out there, you would think your whole marriage had contained some giant secret. It did. Susan looked at me. I know that now. She took a breath. I told myself I was protecting your last months with Mom. I was protecting the version of our family I understood. That sentence hurt because I understood it. Understanding did not make it right. It simply made my anger less comfortable. I did not forgive Susan that morning. I told her so. She nodded. I know. Then she asked, "Are you still meeting him tomorrow?" Yes. Do you want me to come? No. She nodded again. For the first time in 10 years, my daughter accepted that a decision concerning Daniel belonged to me. I met Daniel at a diner halfway between our homes. I arrived 30 minutes early. I told myself I wanted parking. The car park could have accommodated a parade. At 11:58, a silver pickup pulled in. A man climbed out. And before he turned toward the building, I knew. Not because he looked exactly like me. He didn't. But Susan was right. He looked like my father. Same shoulders. Same eyebrows. And when he stopped to look for something inside the truck, he pulled one side of his mouth inward. My father had been dead 36 years. For one irrational second, I felt homesick. Daniel entered. He spotted me. Neither of us waved. He approached the table. Thomas. Daniel. Then we did something incredibly awkward. We both put out a hand. Then both appeared to consider a hug. Then returned to the handshake. If there is a correct way to greet the 60-year-old son you have never met, neither of us knew it. We sat. A waitress poured coffee. Daniel thanked her. I noticed his voice again. Not mine. Good. I was not sure how many similarities I could handle before lunch. He placed a brown folder on the table. Before anything else, I want you to see this. Inside was an old envelope. Yellowed. Creased. My name was written across the front. Thomas Rowan. Underneath was the address where I had lived with my parents at 19. The envelope had been opened. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. The first was Ruth's letter. I read only enough to know Daniel had told me the truth. She wrote that she was expecting a child. She did not demand marriage. She did not accuse me of anything. She wrote that she thought I deserved to know and that she wanted to hear what I wanted to do. The second paper was shorter. I recognized my mother's handwriting before reading a word. It said, "Ruth, Thomas has left and is beginning a different life. Contacting him now would only create obligations neither of you are prepared for. He does not know about your situation, and I believe it is best that it remain that way." There was more. I could not read it. I put the paper down. My mother wrote this. Daniel nodded. She never told me. I know. How do you know? Your wife said the same thing. I looked at him. Daniel continued. Helen asked you about Ruth without mentioning me. When? After she got my letter. She asked whether Ruth had ever contacted you after you left. You told her there had been a few letters and then nothing. I remembered. Barely. A conversation over breakfast. Helen had asked about old girlfriends because Susan had been telling Allie stories about our younger years. I had thought Helen was curious. She had been investigating my life. Daniel said. She believed you. That is supposed to help? No. He looked down at his coffee. I just want you angry at the right things. I laughed once. At the moment I have a wide selection. Daniel smiled. It disappeared quickly. My mother was 17 when she wrote that. I looked up. For 60 years, I remembered Ruth as the girl from the bakery who laughed too loudly and stole cherries from the top of cakes before putting them in the display case. I had never pictured her receiving my mother's letter alone. 17. Frightened. Pregnant. And being told the father of her child had a better future if she stayed out of it. What did she do? Her parents moved to Ohio. My grandfather found work there. She had me in March. Robert married her 2 years later. He knew? Yes. He raised you? Yes. Daniel's voice changed slightly. He was a good father. There was something protective in the sentence. I understood. He did not want meeting me to rewrite the man who had raised him. I respected that immediately. Tell me about him. Daniel looked surprised. Robert? Yes. He repaired buses for the city. He could fix anything. Terrible cook. Good fisherman. Could not sing. Mom said he proposed 3 times because she thought the first 2 were jokes. I laughed. Daniel did too. For the first time, the man across from me stopped feeling like evidence. He became a person. We talked for almost 3 hours. Daniel had been a postal carrier for 34 years. Retired 18 months earlier. Married to Caroline for 36 years. 2 daughters. Maya, 33. Rachel, 29. One grandson, Ben, who was 6 and apparently believed retired adults existed solely to attend weekday school events. I had a grandson I did not know existed. That thought was harder than discovering Daniel. A son at 59 had already lived most of a life before me. A 6-year-old still had missing space ahead. I had missed Daniel's first day of school, his graduation, his wedding, the births of his daughters. Those losses were permanent before I knew they were losses. At one point I asked, "Why did you take the DNA test?" Daniel smiled. "Ben. Your grandson? He had a school family tree project." I laughed. "So a 6-year-old did this to us?" "Apparently. My granddaughter did it from my side." Daniel looked at me. Then both of us started laughing. Two old men whose entire understanding of their family had been rearranged by younger relatives doing homework. Before leaving, Daniel said, "I need to tell you something." I was beginning to dislike that phrase. "What?" "I don't need a father." The sentence hurt. He saw it. That came out wrong. No. It came out honestly. He nodded. "Robert was my father. I buried him 31 years ago. Finding you doesn't change that." "I don't want it to." Daniel looked relieved. "What I want is to know you. If that becomes something else, fine. If it doesn't, I can live with that too." I looked at this man who had waited decades for information I had never known was mine to give. "I don't know what I want yet." "That's fair. But I want another conversation." Daniel smiled. "I'd like that." Then my existing son found out. Michael called that evening. Susan told him. I was angry about that too. My family had apparently developed an impressive communications network around facts concerning me. "Dad, what is going on?" "I met Daniel." Michael was quiet. "You actually met him?" "Yes." "You should have called me first." I almost laughed. Apparently nobody in this family should ever do anything before calling somebody else. "Dad, I'm serious." "So am Madge." "What does he want?" There it is. What? The question everybody asks when a stranger becomes family. It is a reasonable question. He says nothing. You believe that? I felt defensive. Daniel had been in my life for 2 days. Michael had been in it 54 years. And somehow I was already annoyed at Michael on Daniel's behalf. That worried me. Why wouldn't I? Because he contacted Mom and stayed quiet for 12 years. That hardly sounds like somebody chasing money. It sounds like somebody patient. Michael. Dad, you have savings. The house. Mom's investments. I stopped him. You think I don't know what I own? I think you're emotional. That sentence changed the conversation. Not because Michael was entirely wrong. I was emotional. But there is a particular humiliation in hearing your adult child use emotion as evidence that your judgment should count less. Be careful. Michael exhaled. I am trying to protect you. I looked at Helen's photograph again. My mother had protected me. Helen had protected me. Susan had protected me. 60 years of people protecting me had cost me 60 years with a son. I am beginning to hate that word. Michael became quiet. I continued. If Daniel asks me for money, I will deal with it. If he lies to me, I will deal with it. If I make a mistake, it will be my mistake. But nobody is protecting me from my own life again. Michael and I did not speak for 4 days. That was unusual. After Helen died, Michael called most mornings. Sometimes for 5 minutes. Sometimes longer. He checked the boiler each winter. Changed batteries I was perfectly capable of changing myself. Drove me to my first cataract appointment even though I told him 6 times the clinic had parking. Michael was a good son. Good sons can still become frightened. And frightened people sometimes try to shrink the world until they can control every part of it. During those 4 days, I spoke to Daniel twice. The first conversation was 20 minutes. The second lasted 2 hours. We discovered we both hated celery. That was not significant. It felt significant. We both worked with our hands when nervous. I folded paper. He clicked pens. We both developed hearing loss in the left ear first. We both preferred old Western films, although Daniel incorrectly believed several terrible ones were good. But the similarities I noticed most were not mine. They were my father's. Daniel repaired things before replacing them. He sharpened kitchen knives himself. He saved screws in glass jars. He refused to throw away timber longer than a foot because, in his words, that is still a piece of wood. My father had kept an entire shed full of pieces of wood. My mother complained about it until the day he died. The thought of my mother laughing about Daniel's habits should have been warm. Instead, it made me angry again. I wanted to confront her. That is one of the cruelest things about discovering an old betrayal late in life. The person responsible may already be gone. You can understand them. Condemn them. Forgive them. But you cannot ask, "What were you thinking?" The answer has left the world. There was one person still alive who might know more. My mother's younger sister, Jean. Aunt Jean was 87 and lived in a retirement community 40 miles away. She remembered everything. Unfortunately, she also believed remembering something entitled her to tell the story at whatever length she preferred. I visited Saturday. She was playing cards with 3 women who looked annoyed that I had interrupted. Jean looked at me and said, "You found Ruth's boy." I had not said a word. I stood in the doorway. How many people knew? Jean looked at her friends. "Give me 20 minutes. One woman said, "You owe me $7. I'll still owe you when I come back." We went to her apartment. I did not sit. Did you know? Yes. From the beginning? No. Jean pointed toward a chair. "Sit down before you make 79 look dramatic." I sat. She told me my mother confessed the truth in 1996. 37 years after Daniel was born. Why? She was ill. She thought she might die. She didn't. No. Jean smiled. Margaret enjoyed surviving predictions. That sounded like my mother. Why didn't you tell me? Jean did not answer immediately. Because she was my sister. That is not an answer. It was at the time. She looked at me. You were married. You had children. Your life was established. And I told myself what happened at 19 was no longer relevant to the man you had become. Did you ever think Daniel might consider it relevant? Jean's face changed. Yes. Later. Too late? She nodded. Then Jean told me what my mother had been thinking. My father had recently lost his job when Ruth's letter arrived. Money was bad. My training program was my first real opportunity to leave town and build a career. My mother was terrified I would come home, abandon it, marry Ruth because I thought I had to, and spend the rest of my life resenting both of them. So she decided what I would do. Yes. She always said she was protecting you. There is that word again. Jean studied me. Thomas, people can do terrible things because they love you. That doesn't make them less terrible. No. It simply means hating them will not always feel as clean as you want it to. I looked at my aunt. Did my mother regret it? Jean answered immediately. Yes. Then why didn't she tell me? Because regret does not automatically produce courage. That was the most useful sentence anyone said to me that week. I went home and found Michael sitting on my front steps. He held 2 takeaway coffees. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke at first. Then Michael handed me the coffee. Peace offering. It's decaf. Your doctor said after 4. It is 3:45. Then I am 15 minutes early. I took it. Michael stared at the street. I was an ass. That saves time. I shouldn't have made Daniel about money. No. He rubbed his hands together. I got scared. Of what? Michael laughed quietly. This is going to sound ridiculous. Most honest things do at first. He looked at me. I was afraid you would like him more. I stared at my 54-year-old son. Successful engineer. Father of 2. A man who supervised almost 100 employees. And on my front steps, he suddenly looked 12. Michael. I told you it sounded ridiculous. It doesn't. He looked surprised. I asked. Why? Because he's older. I waited. And? Michael smiled awkwardly. He looks like Grandpa. Susan had shown him the photograph Daniel sent. Of course she had. Michael continued. You have spent my whole life telling stories about your dad. How he taught you to repair things. How he never wasted anything. How he worked with his hands. Daniel does all that. You sound jealous of a man you've never met. I am. His honesty disarmed me. Michael laughed at himself. I know how stupid it is. I had you for 54 years. He had nothing. And somehow my first reaction was to start counting what he might take. I put the coffee down. You know what your mother used to say when you and Susan fought over something? Michael smiled. There's enough love in this house, but apparently only one remote control. I laughed. Yes. Then I became serious. Daniel existing does not remove anything from you. I know. No. You understand it. Knowing may take longer. Michael nodded. So will it for me? Then he asked. Are you going to change your will? I turned toward him. Michael held up both hands. That came out terribly. It certainly completed the conversation. Dad? I laughed. Then I told him. I don't know. Okay. And you know what? What? That is none of your business yet. Michael smiled. Fair. A week later, Daniel came to my house. I invited Michael. Not Susan. Not Ellie. I thought my sons needed to meet without an audience. Michael arrived early. He rearranged 3 chairs that did not need rearranging. Then Daniel arrived carrying a pie. I looked at it. You baked? No. Good. Caroline said arriving empty-handed was rude. She sounds sensible. She is. Michael entered from the kitchen. The 2 men looked at each other. Michael was 5 years younger. 2 inches taller. Different coloring. But when they both became uncomfortable, they put their hands in their pockets at exactly the same time. I nearly laughed. Neither would have appreciated it. Daniel, this is Michael. Michael, Daniel. They shook hands. Michael said, I've heard a lot. Daniel replied, apparently I existed before either of us heard very much. Michael laughed. Good start. Then we had the most uncomfortable lunch of my life. Not because anyone fought. Because everyone behaved exceptionally well. We discussed weather. Roadworks. The pie. Michael's job. Daniel's retirement. 2 brothers separated by 60 years of secrecy discussed motorway construction for 11 minutes. Finally, I had enough. I took a DNA test and discovered a son. Both men looked at me. I know that, Michael said. Excellent. Then perhaps we can stop talking about roadworks. Daniel smiled. Michael sighed. Then Michael said, I was suspicious of you. Daniel looked at him. I assumed. That bother you? A little. Fair. Michael continued. I thought maybe you wanted money. I don't. I know that now. Daniel raised an eyebrow. How? Michael looked toward me. Dad said so. Daniel smiled. So you're trusting the emotional old man? I stared at Michael. He had told Daniel about our argument. Michael laughed. I may have apologized in advance. Daniel looked at me. He said he was an ass. At least he is consistent. The room relaxed. Not completely. Enough. Daniel asked Michael about childhood. Michael asked Daniel about Robert. Then Daniel asked something that surprised all 3 of us. What was Helen like as a mother? Michael looked at me. I understood why. Daniel had known Helen for 3 hours in a cafe. Michael had known her his entire life. Loud, Michael said. I laughed. Daniel smiled. She seemed quiet when I met her. She was nervous. Michael continued. She sang while cleaning. Badly. She knew everybody's birthday. She thought feeding people counted as conflict resolution. She once drove 40 minutes to bring me an umbrella after I told her 3 separate times I own one. Daniel laughed. Then Michael said, "She would have liked you." Daniel's face changed. "She told me that." Michael went quiet. For one moment, jealousy crossed his face again. Then something else replaced it. Grief. Daniel had a memory of Helen that Michael did not. 3 hours in a cafe. A secret afternoon. Michael could resent it. Or he could ask. He chose the second. What did she say about us? Daniel smiled. A lot. Specifics. So Daniel told him. Helen had carried photographs. Michael at graduation. Susan with Ellie as a baby. Our family at the lake. She told Daniel Michael had once taken apart a toaster at 9 because he wanted to know where the darkness went when the element turned red. Michael protested that the story was exaggerated. It was not. She told him Susan could remember an insult for 15 years but forgot where she put her keys every morning. She told him I hated mushrooms and pretended not to cry during films by cleaning my glasses at suspiciously emotional moments. Daniel had spent 12 years knowing pieces of us. We had spent 12 years not knowing his name. Michael eventually asked, "Were you angry at her?" Daniel thought. Yes. Why? Because after meeting me, she still went home without telling him. He nodded toward me. I understood why. I even told her not to rush. But every year afterward, part of me wondered whether she had chosen the family she already had over the complication I represented. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel added, "I don't think that anymore." What changed? Age. He smiled slightly. You get old enough and you realize people can love you while failing you badly. Michael looked at me. I looked at Daniel. Helen had somehow left all 3 of us needing that sentence. Susan met Daniel the following week. That meeting was harder. Not because Daniel was angry. Because Susan was ashamed. We met at my house. Susan walked through the door, saw him and immediately started crying. Daniel stood. Susan said, "I am so sorry." Daniel answered, "I know." She shook her head. "No, you don't. I knew about you for 10 years. Yes. I told Mom to wait. I know. Stop making this easy." Daniel smiled sadly. "I'm not." Susan stared at him. "I was angry with you." That surprised everyone. Susan sat. "You were angry with me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you knew him." Daniel pointed toward me. "You had the thing I was looking for. You knew what he sounded like in the morning. What made him angry. What stories he repeated. You got Christmas. You got birthdays. You got arguments. And when you told me to wait because you were protecting him, I thought, of course. The daughter gets to decide when the son is allowed to exist." Susan covered her mouth. Daniel continued. "That wasn't fair. You were frightened. So was Helen. But I need you to understand that being hidden was not neutral for me just because everybody had good reasons." Susan nodded. "I understand." Daniel smiled. No. You're starting to. Susan laughed through tears. That sounds like Dad. Daniel looked horrified. Take it back. We all laughed. Even me. That was the beginning. Not of one big happy family. Life is rarely that obedient. It was the beginning of everybody finally being allowed to be complicated in the same room. Then came Caroline, Daniel's wife. I was more nervous meeting her than Daniel. She had lived 36 years beside a man whose biological father existed somewhere as an unanswered question. I expected suspicion. Instead, Caroline hugged me. That nearly ruined me. Then she said, "You have his ears." I was hoping he had mine. That too. She was practical. Warm without being theatrical. She told me Daniel had looked for me on and off for almost 30 years. Before the internet made finding people easy, he searched telephone directories, old addresses, public records. The problem was Thomas Rowan was not a rare name. He found teachers, mechanics, a dentist, a man in Florida who became extremely offended at being asked whether he knew Ruth Ellison. Eventually Daniel found my mother's obituary online. The relatives listed matched what Ruth had told him. That led to my address. He wrote the letter Helen opened. Then he waited. 12 years. I asked Caroline, "Why didn't you tell him to contact me again?" "Oh, I did." Daniel looked at her. Repeatedly. Caroline ignored him. He said if Helen believed telling you would harm her marriage, he wasn't going to force himself through the door. Daniel protested. That is an oversimplification. It is an accurate simplification. I liked Caroline. Daniel had clearly married above his ability. Then I met Maya and Rachel. My granddaughters. I had imagined them meeting too many times by then. Nothing matched. Maya was outgoing. Rachel quieter. Maya asked 20 questions in the first hour. Rachel watched. At one point Rachel asked, "Is this weird for you?" Everybody looked at me. Yes. Rachel nodded. Good. Good? It would be weird if it wasn't weird. I decided she was sensible. Then Ben arrived. 6 years old. Daniel's grandson. My great-grandson. He ran into the room carrying a plastic dinosaur and asked, "Are you the new grandpa?" I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Maya. Maya closed her eyes. We had a more nuanced explanation. Ben held up the dinosaur. "Do you like triceratops?" I haven't given them much thought. You should. That was the entire negotiation. Within 10 minutes, I was sitting on the floor being instructed about prehistoric animals by a great-grandson I had not known existed a month earlier. At 79, getting onto the floor was easier than getting back up. Ben found this extremely funny. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone. Helen's photograph was on the shelf. I picked it up. For weeks, I had been avoiding speaking to her. That sounds strange. After Helen died, I spoke to her constantly. Nothing dramatic. Small things. You would hate this weather. Michael bought another ridiculous car. Susan still cannot arrive on time. I knew she was not answering. The habit made the house less empty. After Daniel, I stopped. I was too angry with a dead woman to talk to her photograph. That evening I tried again. You should have told me. The room remained quiet. I understand why you were afraid. Nothing. I am still angry. I looked at her face. The photograph was from our 50th anniversary. Helen was laughing because Michael had forgotten how to operate the camera timer and almost fell over a chair. I had spent 5 years remembering that woman as if death had edited every difficult thing out of her. It hadn't. Helen had been loving, funny, generous. And she had hidden my son from me for 12 years. Both could be true. I realized then that grief had made Helen perfect. And perfection is another way of losing someone. The woman I actually married made mistakes. Got frightened. Avoided conversations. Could be stubborn. She had spent 5 decades forgiving versions of me I preferred not to remember. If I wanted to keep loving Helen honestly, I would have to make room for the version who had failed me too. I was not ready to forgive her. But for the first time, I stopped needing her to be innocent before I could miss her. The issue of my will returned 2 months later. Not because Michael raised it. I did. I asked Daniel to meet me at my solicitor's office. He refused. I don't want to be involved in that. It concerns you. No. It concerns your money. It only concerns me if you decide it does. I was annoyed. Mostly because he sounded reasonable. So I made the decision without him. I did not divide everything into thirds. That seemed mathematically fair and emotionally absurd. Michael and Susan had been my children for their entire lives. I had helped buy first homes, paid school fees, contributed to weddings, helped grandchildren. Daniel had received nothing from me. But attempting to balance 60 years with one check would have been another kind of dishonesty. So I created education accounts for Daniel's grandchildren and future grandchildren, the same as I had done for Michael and Susan's families. I left Daniel a modest share. Enough to say, "You belong here." Not enough to pretend. Money can repair time. Then I told all 3 children together. Michael nodded. Susan cried. Daniel became irritated. "You did not have to do that." "I know. I told you I didn't want anything." "I know. Then why?" "Because I wanted to." Daniel stopped. For 60 years, other people had made decisions about him in the name of what was best for me. I wanted at least one decision concerning my son to begin with what I wanted and end with him being allowed to accept or reject it. He accepted. Eventually. By spring, Daniel and I had settled into something neither of us named. He called on Wednesdays. I visited him twice. He came to help me repair the garden shed. I told him I did not need help. He said, "I know." Then helped anyway. That felt familiar enough to be irritating. One afternoon, we were replacing a rotten board when Daniel asked, "What was your father like?" I sat on the step. Then I told him. Not the polished stories. I told him my father could be impatient. That he snored. That he once ruined a family holiday because he refused to admit he was lost. That he taught me woodworking. That he never said I love you comfortably but drove 3 hours through snow when my first car broke down. Daniel listened. Then he said, "I wish I'd met him." That sentence broke something open in me. I wish you had too. We sat beside each other without speaking. For 60 years, Daniel had been missing from photographs he never knew should contain him. My father had died without knowing he had another grandson. There was no way to make that fair. So we did the only thing available. We talked about him. Summer came. Ellie finished the family tree. Or tried to. Family's object to being finished. She brought a large printed version to my house. My parents at the top. Me beneath them. Then 3 branches. Daniel. Michael. Susan. I stared at it. For 59 years, the drawing had been wrong. Not because anybody had drawn the wrong names. Because one branch had existed outside our knowledge. Ellie stood beside me. "Are you okay?" "Yes." Then she looked guilty. "What?" "I feel like I caused all of this." I turned toward her. "You think because you bought me the test?" "Yes." I put an arm around her. "Ellie, you did not create a 60-year secret. You turned on the light. Some of us simply did not like what was already in the room." She smiled. "So you're not angry?" "I am still angry you messaged Daniel before telling me." "That is fair. But I forgive you." "Thank you." "Mostly." Grandpa. Helen would have enjoyed that argument. My relationship with Susan took longer. She kept apologizing. I kept saying I hurt her. Those were not the same as forgiveness. One afternoon, almost a year after the DNA test, Susan asked me directly, "Do you trust me?" I wanted to say yes. She was my daughter. I loved her. But love makes people answer important questions too quickly. So I thought. "I trust you differently." Susan's face fell. I continued. "That isn't punishment. Before Daniel, I assumed you would always tell me anything important because you were my daughter. Now I know you can become frightened and make a bad choice. So can I. Trusting you now means knowing that about you and choosing you anyway." Susan cried. "So that's forgiveness?" "I think it might be." She hugged me. And for the first time, I realized forgiveness was not restoring our relationship to what it had been. What it had been included a 10-year secret. I did not want that relationship back. I wanted the one we could build knowing what both of us were capable of. 2 years have passed now. I am 81. Daniel is 61. He still calls me Thomas most of the time. That once bothered me. Then I understood. Dad belonged to Robert Price. A good man who raised Daniel, taught him, argued with him, attended school plays, repaired bicycles and stood at his wedding. I do not need to steal a word from a dead man to prove Daniel and I matter to each other. Occasionally Daniel calls me Dad by accident. He usually corrects himself. I pretend not to notice either part. Michael and Daniel have become something close to brothers. Not because DNA made them feel anything automatically. They worked at it. Michael helped Daniel replace a fence. Daniel helped Michael repair an old motorcycle I had repeatedly advised him to sell. They ignore my advice together now. Apparently brotherhood has advantages for everyone except the father. Susan and Caroline exchange recipes. Ellie and Maya talk frequently. Ben still asks me about dinosaurs. I have learned more about the Cretaceous period than any 81-year-old man should be required to know. And Aunt Jean is still alive. 90 now. She has met Daniel twice. The first time, she cried. The second time, she told him my father cheated at cards. Daniel said, "Now I finally know where Thomas gets it. I do not cheat at cards. There is simply disagreement within the family regarding certain rules." Last autumn, Daniel and I drove together to the town where Ruth had lived before moving to Ohio. The bakery was gone. A pharmacy stood there now. We parked across the street. Daniel asked, "What was she like at 17? I thought about it. Funny. Impatient. Always late. She stole cherries from cakes." Daniel laughed. "She still did that." I looked at him. For the first time, Ruth became more than the girl I had known. Daniel told me about the woman she became. She worked in a library for 28 years. She loved gardening. She hated flying. She spoiled her granddaughters. She stayed married to Robert until he died. She never remarried. She died peacefully at 76. I wish I could have thanked her. Daniel looked at me. "For what?" "For raising you." He became quiet. Then he nodded. "She did a good job." "Mostly." I smiled. Parents rarely deserve the full grade their children give them. Before leaving town, we drove past my childhood house. Somebody had painted it blue. My mother would have hated that. I stood on the pavement looking at the upstairs window where my bedroom had been. Somewhere inside that house, 60 years earlier, my mother opened a letter addressed to me. She read it. She became frightened. And she made a decision that changed 3 generations. For 2 years, I had tried to decide whether I forgave her. Standing there, I realized the question no longer mattered as much. I understood her. I loved her. I believed what she did was wrong. All 3 could exist without canceling one another. That may be one of the privileges of growing old. When you are young, you want people to be good or bad because certainty feels safer. Age gives you enough evidence to know better. Daniel stood beside me. "You okay?" "Yes." Then I laughed. "Actually, no." Daniel smiled. "That sounds healthier." We got back in the car. As I started the engine, Daniel said, "Dad?" My hand froze on the gear lever. He froze too. Neither of us looked at the other. Then Daniel said, "Sorry." I stared through the windscreen. "Don't be." That was it. No speech. No dramatic embrace. He had said one word by accident. And somehow 60 lost years became both more painful and more bearable. People sometimes ask whether I wish Shelley had never bought the DNA test. There are mornings when part of me does. Before the test, Helen was uncomplicated in my memory. My mother was uncomplicated. Susan was uncomplicated. I had 2 children. The past was finished. There is comfort in a finished past. The DNA test took that comfort away. It gave me questions nobody alive could fully answer. Anger with people I still loved. Guilt over things I had never been given the opportunity to do. It gave Michael a brother he initially feared. Susan a secret she finally had to face. Daniel a biological father almost 60 years late. And me a son whose childhood existed only in other people's photographs. But it also gave me Daniel, Maya, Rachel, Ben. It gave Michael somebody who understands why I save pieces of wood nobody needs. It gave Susan another person to worry about, which she apparently considers a hobby. And it gave Ellie a family tree she has already had to reprint 3 times. So no. I do not wish I had remained ignorant. Peace built on missing information is not peace. It is simply silence you have not questioned yet. I lost 59 years with my son. There is no lesson beautiful enough to make that acceptable. No forgiveness returns his first steps. No apology puts me at his graduation. No family photograph can insert me beside Ruth when she held him as a baby. I miss those things. They are gone. One of the hardest lessons of age is that not every loss can be repaired. Some can only be acknowledged. But acknowledging lost time does not require wasting what remains because the beginning was unfair. My mother decided I was too young to choose. Helen decided I was too overwhelmed to choose. Susan decided I was too frightened to choose. Michael almost decided I was too emotional to choose. Every one of them loved me. That is what makes the story important. Control does not always arrive wearing cruelty. Sometimes it arrives with concern. With good intentions. With somebody saying, "I didn't tell you because I was trying to protect you." And sometimes protection becomes a wall the person inside never asked you to build. These days, when my family has information concerning my life, they tell me. Sometimes I wish they would return to secrecy. Michael recently sent me a detailed explanation of my new boiler warranty. There are limits to transparency. But the important things are different now. Susan asks instead of deciding. Michael advises instead of protecting. Daniel does not wait for permission to call. And I have learned that being the oldest person in a family does not automatically make me the wisest. Sometimes it merely means I have had longer to practice my mistakes. On my wall now is a photograph Ellie took last spring. Nothing formal. No matching clothes. No perfect arrangement. Michael is on one side of me. Daniel on the other. Susan is arguing with somebody outside the frame. Ellie apparently pressed the button while half of us were still talking. Ben is holding a dinosaur in front of his face. It is a terrible photograph. I love it. For most of my life, I thought a family photograph recorded who belonged. Now I understand it can only record who happened to be there when someone pressed the button. The people missing from the picture may still belong. The people present may still be carrying secrets. Families are larger and messier than photographs allow. I started this story believing I had 2 children. Then my granddaughter asked whether we were Scottish. For the record, we are. 12%. That fact seems significantly less important now. What mattered was the line underneath it. Parent-child match. Daniel Price. A son I never knew existed. A son my mother prevented me from knowing. A son my wife met and was too afraid to tell me about. A son my daughter helped keep secret. And, somehow, after all that lost time, a son I still had time to meet. That last part is the one I choose to carry.